What happens when Britain's most beloved comedy mastermind sits down for what should have been a light, breezy morning chat, only to find himself face-to-face with a host determined to tear him apart on live television? It took exactly 29 seconds for Lorraine Kelly to make a comment that would shatter her reputation and turn her own show into a battlefield she could never hope to win. The morning began like any other at the ITV studios. Lorraine sat in her bright yellow chair, her smile stretched tight and artificial as the cameras rolled. Her guest for the day, Rowan Atkinson, the legendary creator of Mr. Bean, Johnny English and Blackadder, had arrived to promote his newest project. Simple, straightforward, harmless. Except it wasn't. From the moment Rowan stepped onto the set, something felt wrong. The usual warmth Lorraine gave her guests, manufactured or not, was mysteriously absent. Instead, she watched him with the weary disdain of someone forced to babysit a circus act past its prime. "Right then," she said flatly, not even rising to greet him. "Rowan Atkinson." Everyone. The man who made a career out of not talking. The audience laughed, but it was shaky, uneasy. Rowan offered a polite smile as he sat down, but a tiny flicker of something disappointment, maybe even foreboding, crossed his face. "Thank you for having me, Lorraine," he said, calm and professional. "We had to," she snapped back, barking a laugh. "Your team's been calling us for weeks, absolutely desperate to get you on." The first red flag. Rowan raised his brows just slightly. "Well, I do have a new film coming out, so we thought your viewers might be interested." "Might be," Lorraine muttered, flipping through her notes with theatrical boredom. Then she looked up and delivered the blow. "Forgive me for being blunt, Rowan, but don't you think you're getting a bit old for all this physical comedy nonsense? I mean, you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." The studio froze. Even the cameraman shifted awkwardly. This wasn't cheeky banter. This was a strike. Rowan straightened, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "Oh, don't play dumb," Lorraine said, leaning in like she'd scented blood. "You're 68. Isn't it time to hang up the rubber faces and silly walks? Leave it to the young people." "I wasn't aware there was an age limit on entertaining," Rowan replied, still steady, but with steel beginning to surface. "There isn't officially," she sneered. "But there's something rather sad about watching an old man try to be funny. Like your grandfather trying to be hip. Embarrassing, really?" A ripple of shock ran across the audience, but Lorraine wasn't finished. "Let's be honest," she continued, practically savoring the moment. Mr. Bean was what, 30 years ago? And it wasn't exactly Shakespeare, was it? A grown man acting like a toddler. What does that say about British comedy standards? Rowan's hands tightened in his lap until his knuckles went white, but his voice remained steady. Mr. Bean has brought joy to millions of people, families, children, adults. I'm rather proud of that. Are you, though? Lorraine pressed, sensing vulnerability she could exploit. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a man who peaked decades ago and is clinging to relevance. When was the last time you did anything genuinely funny? And please don't say Johnny English. That was just Mr. Bean in a suit." The temperature in the room plummeted. Crew members exchanged glances. This wasn't journalism. This was public humiliation. Rowan spoke quietly, his voice steady but filled with weight. "I came here to talk about my new project, not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who thinks morning television qualifies them to judge artistic merit." "Oh, artistic merit." Lorraine laughed, slapping her knee. "Listen to him, everyone. Artistic merit from a man who built a career on falling over." She turned to the audience, inviting them to join in the mockery, but they didn't. They sat, frozen, appalled. "Oh, you know what I think?" Lorraine said, her voice sharp as glass. "I think you're jealous. Jealous of real comedians. Jimmy Carr, Sarah Millican. People with wit, intelligence people who don't need playground antics to get a laugh. Rowan's composure wavered, a twitch near his left eye, a short breath drawn too quickly. "Those are talented comedians," he said tightly. "But comedy isn't a competition." "There's room for, is there though?" she interrupted, her voice biting. "Because your style went out with the arc. Physical comedy is dead, Rowan. Dead and buried. And the sooner you step aside for people with actual talent, the better off we'll all be." That was it. This was the moment everything changed. Rowan Atkinson. The man who had made the world laugh for 40 years, who had brought joy to millions, who had never uttered a cruel word about anyone in public, had finally heard enough. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Lorraine's face. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of dignity. "Talent," he said softly. "You want to talk about talent, do you?" Lorraine froze. For the first time in the entire interview, she sensed she'd pushed too far, but it was too late to retreat. "Yes," Rowan continued, rising from his chair with measured calm. "Let's talk about talent." The studio lights seemed to dim as Rowan Atkinson stood to his full height, towering over Lorraine, who genuinely believed she could dismantle him with cheap insults and playground taunts. Lorraine finally looked nervous. "Sit down, Rowan," she stammered, grasping for control. "We're in the middle of an interview." "No," he replied, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We're in the middle of an ambush. And I'm done being your victim." He turned to face the audience, his back to Lorraine. Every single person in the studio sat frozen, breath held, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rowan began, "I've been in show business for over 4 decades. I've worked with some of the most brilliant minds in comedy. I've performed for royalty, for children, for people in every corner of the world. And in all that time, I've never not once encountered someone so desperate to tear down another person's life's work just to make themselves feel important." Lorraine's mouth hung open. This was not the timid, polite man she thought she could bully. "Now hang on," Lorraine started, but Rowan lifted a hand without even looking at her. "I'm talking now," he said. "You had your turn. You had 20 minutes to show everyone exactly what kind of person you are. Now it's my turn." He faced her again, and the look in his eyes made her sink deeper into her bright yellow chair. "You want to talk about talent, Lorraine? Fine. Let's talk about your talent. What exactly is it you do here? You read from a teleprompter. You ask questions written by other people. You smile on cue and pretend to care about celebrities you've never met. Where's the talent in that?" The audience sat in stunned silence. You could hear the hum of the studio lights. "At least when I pull a face or take a pratfall, I'm doing something. I'm creating joy. I'm making a child laugh. I'm giving a tired worker 30 minutes of escape from their troubles. What do? You sit in that chair and tear people down to make yourself feel better about your own mediocrity. I think you're being rather unfair," Lorraine whispered. "Unfair?" Rowan's voice rose for the first time, controlled but edged with fire. "You've spent 20 minutes telling me I'm too old, that my work is worthless, that I should step aside for real comedians. You called my life's work embarrassing. You compared me to a grandfather trying to be hip. And now you're worried about fairness." He began pacing slowly, his hands moving with sharp precision. The physical comedian was gone, replaced by a man who had held his tongue for 40 years and was now finally speaking. "Do you know what Mr. Bean has done for this world?" He continued, voice steady, yet charged with emotion. "I've received letters from parents telling me they're autistic. Children spoke their first words while watching Bean. Soldiers in Afghanistan wrote to me, saying my films helped them through their darkest days. I've met children in hospitals who forgot their pain for an hour because of something I created." Lorraine shrank further into her chair. Rowan, maybe we should. But what have you created, Lorraine? He pressed on. What will you leave behind? 30 years of asking celebrities about their haircuts. 30 years of reading gossip columns and calling it journalism. You judge my work, but where is yours? What have you made that will outlast you? The producers were likely screaming into their headsets, but no one dared interrupt. You know what's really sad? Rowan said, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. It's not an old man trying to make people laugh. It's a bitter woman so threatened by joy that she feels the need to stamp it out. Someone so insecure about their own lack of substance that they must attack anyone who brings something meaningful to the world. Lorraine swallowed, her voice barely audible. I was just asking questions. No, Rowan said, stepping closer to her desk, his presence suffocating. You were trying to humiliate me on live television. You thought I was just a quiet little man who wouldn't fight back. You thought wrong. He leaned forward, hands planted firmly on her desk. Looking her directly in the eyes. Let me tell you something about comedy, Lorraine. Real comedy comes from truth. It comes from observing people, seeing their struggles, their joys, their fears, and reflecting them in a way that helps them cope. Physical comedy, the kind you mock, is the purest form there is. It crosses every language, every culture. A child in Japan and a grandmother in Scotland can watch the same pratfall and laugh together. That's not simple. That's not silly. That's miraculous. A soft murmur of agreement rose from the audience. The energy had shifted completely. Rowan straightened and gestured around the studio. But what you do here, this isn't about uplifting anyone. It isn't about making lives better. It's about feeding your ego. It's about feeling powerful by making others feel small. And frankly, he paused, letting the moment stretch. It's pathetic. Lorraine looked around desperately, eyes darting to the crew, the cameras, the audience, anyone who might rescue her from the nightmare she had built with her own hands. You called my work playground antics. Rowan said, straightening to his full height again. Well, maybe that's exactly what the world needs more of. Lorraine blinked, stunned. Maybe we need more playground joy and less boardroom cruelty. Maybe the world would be a kinder place. If more people were willing to look foolish just to make someone else smile, and fewer people believed tearing others down made them look intelligent. He turned back to the audience, his voice gaining strength. I've been called a lot of things in my career. Silly, childish, simple. A murmur of laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was warm, supportive. And you know what? I wear those labels proudly, because if being silly means bringing happiness to millions, then I'll be silly until the day I die. If being childish means remembering what it's like to find wonder in the world, then childish is exactly what I want to be. And if being simple means I don't have to hurt others to feel important, he paused. Then, simple sounds perfect to me. The audience erupted, not with the forced applause of a morning show, but with real emotional appreciation for what they were witnessing. Lorraine stayed frozen, eyes wide, realizing too late that she had picked a fight with the wrong man. When the applause faded, the energy in the studio remained electric, charged, irrevocably changed. Rowan stood calm, centered, while Lorraine looked like she wanted to sink into her bright yellow chair and vanish. But he wasn't done. You know what the real tragedy is here, Lorraine? He said gently, so gently that it somehow hit harder. His voice carried not anger, but something far more devastating. Disappointment. It's not that you don't understand comedy. It's that you don't understand people. Lorraine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was out of her depth, drowning. When you mock physical comedy, Rowan continued, when you call it childish and outdated, you aren't just attacking me. You're attacking every person who found comfort in laughter during their darkest hour. You're dismissing every child who learned it was okay to be different by watching someone on screen celebrate their own quirks. He stepped forward, not looming. Not intimidating, but radiating a quiet heartbreak. I've met war veterans who told me Mr. Bean helped them reconnect with their families. Teachers who used my films to reach children who had given up on learning. Carers who said my comedy gave them 5 minutes of peace while taking care of loved ones with dementia. The studio went completely silent. So quiet, the hum of the cameras felt loud. But to you, Rowan said softly, all of that is just playground antics. All of those moments of connection, all of that healing through laughter, it's just an old man pulling faces. He tilted his head, looking at her with a mix of sadness and disbelief. Do you see how small that makes you? How limited your understanding of entertainment, of humanity, really is? Lorraine finally croaked out, I never meant to suggest your work hasn't helped people, didn't you? Rowan asked, his voice cool but not cruel, because you said my comedy was embarrassing. You said it was time for me to step aside. You compared me to a desperate old man clinging to relevance. Those were your words, weren't they? She nodded, tiny and reluctant, knowing millions had heard every syllable. And now you want to walk it back because you realize you've revealed something ugly about yourself on live television. Rowan looked at her for a long, heavy moment. But this, he said, turning to include the audience, isn't about me anymore. It's about who you choose to be. The entire room leaned in, hanging on his every word. We live in a world that grows crueler every day. People sit behind screens and tear each other apart. They mock anyone who dares to be vulnerable, or different, or joyful. They forget that kindness isn't weakness. That bringing happiness to others is one of the highest callings a person can have. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. This isn't just about comedy, Rowan said. This is about decency. He gestured toward the cameras, the millions watching at home. And someone like Lorraine gets a platform, a microphone, the chance to reach millions every morning. And what does she choose to do with that power? He looked back at her soft, sad, unflinching. She uses it to make people feel small. She uses it to tell a man who has devoted his life to joy that his work is worthless. Lorraine looked like she was about to cry. Her once perfect makeup had begun to smudge, the bright studio lights exposing every crack in her composure. But here's what she doesn't understand, Rowan said, his voice rising with quiet strength. You can't diminish light by pointing out darkness. You can't make yourself taller by cutting other people down. His voice steadied, growing even more resonant, impossible to interrupt. And you certainly can't understand art by shrinking it to your own narrow, bitter perspective. He walked back toward his chair, not to retreat, but to reclaim the space. He didn't sit. He simply rested a hand on the backrest, standing taller than he ever had in any sketch, radiating a calm, dignified authority that dwarfed Lorraine in her own studio. Physical comedy isn't just about laughs, he said. Though, if it were, that would be enough. It's about showing people that failure isn't fatal, that looking foolish doesn't rob you of your dignity, that it's okay to fall as long as you keep getting back up. The camera zoomed in, capturing every controlled gesture, every flicker of emotion across his face. Mr. Bean doesn't speak because he doesn't have to. His humanity speaks for him. His mistakes, his clumsiness, his awkwardness, they connect with people who felt like outsiders their entire lives. Rowan's voice softened, but its impact deepened. That isn't childish, Lorraine. That's universal. That's profound. Lorraine made one last fragile attempt to regain control. Well, I think we can agree that no, Rowan cut in. Not harshly, but with an immovable certainty. We can't agree because we do not share the same values. The studio froze. You value cynicism. I value wonder. You value tearing down. I value lifting up. You make people feel small. I try to make them feel like they belong. He adjusted his jacket, then turned directly to the main camera. The audience at home suddenly felt as though he was speaking to each of them personally. To anyone watching who creates something, anything that brings light into the world, don't let people like this make you doubt its light. Your art matters. Your humor matters. Your way of seeing the world matters. Don't let bitterness convince you that joy is meaningless. Then came the moment no one expected. He smiled. A real smile, warm, gentle, disarming, the kind of smile that had once launched a global phenomenon. "Thank you all for listening," he said to the audience. "And thank you, Lorraine, for reminding me why I do what I do." Sometimes we need to meet people who've forgotten how to find joy, to remember how precious it is. He took a step toward the exit, then another. The audience rose to their feet as if pulled upward by an invisible force. Applause thundered through the studio, raw, emotional, overwhelming. Some people cried, others grinned through tears. A moment of collective clarity had swept across the room, and everyone felt it. Lorraine remained seated, looking small behind her desk, surrounded by the debris of a disaster entirely of her own making. She had underestimated him, underestimated kindness itself. And now she was sitting alone in the ruins. Rowan reached the studio door, paused, and turned back one final time. "Oh. And Lorraine," he said, his voice echoing effortlessly across the silent room. "The next time you want to interview someone about their life's work, you might want to actually watch some of it first. You'd be amazed what you can learn when you approach something with an open mind instead of a closed heart." The door shut behind him with a soft, devastating click, the kind that felt less like a departure and more like the last note of a symphony. The applause continued even as producers cut to commercial, leaving Lorraine in the harsh quiet of her own regret. The greatest physical comedian of his generation had just delivered the performance of a lifetime, without pulling a single face or taking a single pratfall. He had used nothing but words, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in the power of human kindness to turn a vicious ambush into a masterclass in dignity. And somewhere in the silence that followed, you could almost hear the sound of a career ending and a legend walking away.